Matchamaron, Jirachi. Apparently that actually means welcome, you spawn of lambs, or you little boy. I'm going to keep using it anyway because I kind of like it even if it's a bit insulting. It's kind of the Dothraki way. Today I'm going to talk about what I've noticed as I've gone through the series over the past few weeks concerning all the languages that George R.R. Martin has in his books. He actually has around 11 languages, which is quite a bit. Dothraki isn't the only one, although it certainly has the most words and the most sophisticated culture around it. These languages include High Valyrian, the Bastard Valyrian dialects, the Old Tongue, the Common Tongue, Asa'i, the Summer Tongue, Giscari, the Trader language that Arya meets in Braavos. But again, the most built up is Dothraki. But what's really interesting is that each of these languages generally has a few characteristics which sort of make it unique and sound different to George R.R. Martin. And what I want to highlight today is that some of the things we think about Dothraki that are really, really individual and unique actually aren't necessarily, and could just be George R.R. Martin painting a broad, non-linguistic brush. Right. So what I've noticed is a few things that Martin does. One, he puts Q's without U's. Two, he uses a broad stroke E or she suffix for anything involving a city and what that city has to do, like in making it an adjective or a plural noun. And three, he uses a lot of geminates. Right, so starting off with the first one, Q without U. George R.R. Martin loves this. As you know, in English, you always need to have a W sound after Q, quell. It doesn't really work otherwise. This is called a labialized uvular stop, or labialized velar stop. If you speak English, if you can understand me, you probably know the sound. But George R.R. Martin repeatedly in his books uses words which don't have this. This even happens in the Common Tongue, which is supposed to be pretty much English, unless he's taking the Tolkien-esque approach and saying, I actually translated all these books from another language called Westron, which I don't think he is. So some examples are Carl the Maid, Carl the Thrall, Corin Halfhand, and Qyburn. And these four names actually all come from the Common Tongue, as far as we know. Two of them actually come from the Ironborn Islands. The Iron Islands, where Asha and Theon are from. So that's Carl the Maid and Carl the Thrall. And all of these don't have a U after them. One of them, Corin Halfhand, actually has an H. Now, there's a few things you could say, okay, this is why he did this. It could be that he wanted to just have a variant spelling of K, which would be cool and fine. But it could also be that he wants to have a uvular stop, such as in Qatar, the nation in the Middle East. I can't actually do any uvular stops. I'm very bad at them, apparently, so don't listen to my pronunciation, just take the words I'm saying. And if so, we really have a few questions to ask, because the Common Tongue, as we know it, is English, and English doesn't allow this sort of construction. If there's a Q, there has to be a U. So maybe he was doing it just to sound a bit exotic, which is kind of interesting if you think about it. Right. The second thing I was going to talk about is the suffixation. So there are 9 free cities. These are the most common examples of this. There are Lys, Myr, Pentos, Braavos, Tirosh, Volantis. And whenever George R.R. Martin talks about them as an adjective, so like the Myrish lace, he always uses pretty much, there's 1 or 2 exceptions, an ish suffix. So Myrish, Pentoshi, Bravosi, Norvoshi. Notice that Bravosi doesn't actually have an SH sound, which is a bit odd because it doesn't really fit. Then you also have Lysine and Volantine. These don't have this either, but they still have a high vowel. And whenever he talks about people from those cities as a whole, he always uses a different form. So like the Bravosi people, or the Navoshi, or the Lyseni. And you'll notice that all of these sound really similar, which is weird, because basically these are names being applied by people who speak the Common Tongue in Westeros to the free cities. And so it can't really be a Valyrian construction. But the real problem is that this works for other places as well. For instance, Skagos. It's called Skagosi at one point. Or Asai under the shadow. It's called Asai. They just put an apostrophe in and then an I, and we don't really know how that works. And the fact that this is used so ubiquitously in the books seems to suggest that it's not actually a Dothraki characteristic to have a plural I sound, which is what David Peterson seems to think, and what he's chosen to use, which is fine. That's a totally valid way to see it. But Dothraki is not the only language that does this. If you actually look at the other languages in the book, they all pretty much do this. Or at least George R.R. Martin uses these words to represent them this way, which is really kind of funny. It's the same with the Q. There's a few times in Dothraki where a Q is used without a U. For instance, Kojako or Jako Ran. Now, both these times there's no U. And that's just really weird, because you think that if he's going to use this for Dothraki alone, he wouldn't use it in other languages. But he does. And so maybe Dothraki isn't as individual as we think. Right. The third thing I want to talk about is geminates. Geminates are long consonants. Basically where you have two consonants next to each other. One's at the end of the syllable, one's at the start of the next syllable. Sort of how they work as far as I understand it. Now, in Dothraki we have a few of them. I just mentioned one of them actually, Jako, which is Jaqqo. Now, in English, you actually have the same sort of thing. You have it in bookkeeper. We have bookkeeper. You see, it's actually, the K's right next to each other, two K's. Now, you think that he wouldn't apply this across the languages, but actually he does. Braavosi, for instance, has like half of its names have geminates. I'm not going to list them all here because there's too many, but if you go on the wiki where I've labeled them all, you'll see that actually like 20 words that have geminated consonants in them. And this also makes you think, well, this could be part of Valyrian, or it could be part of Dothraki as well, or, hypothetically, George R.R. Martin might just like the way it looks on the page, and the way it might sound to him, and so he uses this feature repeatedly to make his languages more exotic. Now, basically, these three things I've just mentioned, the Q without a U, the geminates, and the she and e endings are all legitimate. I mean, they all make sense. You can use them in all the languages, that's fine. But it seems to me unnatural that they would be in all the languages. And this is the main reason I actually went through the books looking for other languages. Because if you identify that George R.R. Martin uses these repeatedly to make his languages sound exotic, then they don't lend as much weight to the Dothraki alone as they ought to. Hopefully, as the language continues to grow, we'll be able to identify more of these sort of things, more instances where George R.R. Martin sort of messed up, and David Peterson had to work around it. I'm not saying this because I want to make David Peterson's work any less. I just wanted to say, well, this is where he started from, and as you can tell, this wasn't a linguist, and so what he's done with the language is really amazing, by the way. But as we go on, let's see if we can know any more. If you know any more, please leave a comment, and check in again soon. Thanks, guys.